Live number 2 today. What a day. What a day it's been. If you missed it earlier, a topic that I have taught live, not live streaming, but like when I'm doing woodworking presentations, a topic I've taught a number of times is cutting aluminum on a table saw. And that was the live stream I did at 11 o'clock this morning. And it's a weird, people look at it and they're like, holy buckets, and I was too, the first time I did it. There's a special blade required. There's some other setup things you do. And if you miss that at 11, stay with us until 5 now. Stay with us for an hour, but then go back and check out that live stream. It's crazy cool, and it's amazing how quickly I cut 1/4-inch aluminum plate. It's amazing how quickly that aluminum will go through the table saw. On a saw stop like I have, you have to make a special accommodation because it's a saw stop. And I talk about all that stuff. So that was very, very, very fun. It's a very cool topic and a very unique thing to be able to do on your table saw. For today, general Q&A, whatever Q's you have, you're welcome to provide. If I don't have the A, I am happy to say I don't know, because I don't know. One of the things I want to point out is we have put together a packet of information. We're calling it Getting Started in Woodworking, but it's pretty all-encompassing. Even if you've been woodworking for a while, there's a lot of stuff there that is going to be helpful to you. Creating a work triangle in your shop, lumber storage, shop storage in general. What tools, sorry, I'm blanking out a second, what tools you need. And one of the things I did for that is I polled a bunch of other woodworkers, people whose names you're going to recognize, Alicia Albertson, Jess Crow, Dan Wellens. So I got information from all those people about what tools they recommend. And all of that stuff is in a survey format that you can read through and see what you agree with, what you disagree with. Maybe get your sights set on what you want Santa to bring you for Christmas next year. So that whole survey is pretty cool too. But anyway, on the page you're on, that you're watching this on, if you go down just a little bit, there's kind of a banner and it says Getting Started in Woodworking. Click here. And if you click there, that'll take you to that, where all that information is. So check that out. It's very cool. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in the last few months, remember a few lives ago, Alicia Albertson was sitting right here with me. And a few lives before that, Jimmy DiResta was here with me. And the videos that we shot with Jimmy and with Alicia are finding their way to the page, to the site. So if you've not done so already, have a look at those videos. And it's nice because I don't know everything there is to know about woodworking. So when I bring these outside people in, one, you might like their style way better than you like my style, understandable. Two, they're covering topics that I can't cover. So there's information there that's going to be new because it's not, it was new to me as well when we did the video. So check out the stuff from Alicia and Jimmy and just have a look at the videos that they've got cooking. And I think you're going to really enjoy them. So, whoops, wrong password. There we go. I'm going to jump in here. John says, I have a slab of walnut that I want to be the top of a bench. It has some holes in the end grain I would like to fill. I was thinking about using epoxy to fill the holes. The holes are not checks, they're actual holes in the wood. So if you've not heard that phrase before, checks is another word for cracks. They're actual holes in the wood. If I use epoxy, would a deep pour be better since I don't know how deep the holes go? Or would mortising out that area and plugging it be better? Thanks for everything you teach us. And thanks for that comment. I love doing this, so I'm happy to teach. And there's not a right answer to this, either or. On the should I use deep pour question, I would say yes, because just what you're saying, you don't know how far, how deep those holes go. And then the other thing is, like, when I talk about deep pour type epoxy applications, you never know inside the wood if it's kind of cavernous inside there. And deep pour epoxy is typically a lot more watery than a tabletop epoxy would be. So as a result, it's going to flow out much better. It's going to fill those voids much better than a tabletop would. So if you choose to use epoxy, yes, I would use a deep pour. There's nothing wrong with mortising, cutting the holes to a shape you can work with and then plugging it. Either one of those is going to work well. In the end, it might be easier to just do the epoxy instead of, especially if they're end grain, trying to stand a slab up on end and do some machining up here on the end of the slab in order to get a uniform hole that you can put some kind of a plug into. So I'd probably just pour epoxy, but either one would be okay. But yes to deep pour. Robert says, I've been trying to tune my bandsaw, and I think I have everything about perfect, but, all in caps, when I feed stock into it, it contacts the top of the stock long before the bottom touches the blade. The blade seems to be in the center of both tires. The guide bearings don't look wonky. Should I move the bottom wheel forward some to get the blade to contact closer to simultaneously top and bottom of the workpiece? So I'm assuming that we're talking about a like a resaw type application here, not just I'm cutting 3/4 or 1.5 inch thick stock. So if we have, I'm looking at the monitor to try to not glare the heck out of you here. So if we have a bandsaw blade, and a table. And then when your stock comes in, currently, it's meeting at the top of the blade before it meets at the bottom. And I'm drawing this in a way to make that happen. But I assume the end of your stock has been cut square. So I wouldn't, if the blade is tracking fine and everything else is okay, I would not want to mess with the position of the lower wheel, because I think that has a great opportunity to mess up your tracking and make about 200 other things go wrong. What I have heard about, I've never had to do it to a bandsaw, I would set a square. Look at that, I've got a third color. I'd put a square on here and check for squaricity between the blade and the table. And from what we're seeing here, it looks like that's when we're up against the teeth of the blade, this will not be square. It's not perpendicular. So what I have heard about people doing is shimming their bandsaw table to correct this. And like I said, I've never had to do it. But underneath the table, there's a big trunnion. And what one could do would be, let's see, we're touching at the top before we touch at the bottom. So if you put shims, and those shims could just be in the form of like flat washers. If you put a shim here, that's going to push the front of the table up, and then, oh no, that's going to make it worse. Other way around. We want to, delete, reverse, shim, so that we tip it up this way. Then that's going to get you closer to where the whole thing contacts at one time. And I think if you're off that much where it's bothering you, it's probably worth fixing, because if you ever cut something thick and you're turning, this arrangement could make that funky as well. So put a square on there, and then you could Google the concept of shimming a bandsaw table and see if you get some other ideas from that. But I think shimming the outfeed side, raise that, would take you toward the correction of this issue. But like I said, I don't have any real world experience with it, because I've never had to do it. And then Top Gun says, we'll just call him Maverick, advice on minimizing snipe with a DeWalt benchtop planer. I've tried the feed a scrap board before and after the real project. Maybe my rollers are not tuned. So again, in the world of words maybe you're not familiar with, snipe is when you get just a little bit of an overcut on the lead edge and trailing edge of a board you're planing or jointing. So you don't say which model planer it is, but on benchtop planers, typically there isn't a way to adjust the infeed rollers. On stationary planers, there is. There's a adjustment on top of the planer that allows you to control the tension on those rollers. I've never seen that on a benchtop planer. Some, like the DeWalt 735 planer, has its own built-in anti-snipe device. In other words, you don't have to lock it. The other DeWalt planers, other planers from other brands, do have a headstock lock that once you set your depth of cut, you lock the headstock, and that goes a long way toward reducing or eliminating snipe. So first, make sure if you've got a headstock lock, you're using it. I don't understand how the physics could be if you're feeding scrap at the end of the board, how that could not be eliminating snipe. What happens to understand this whole dilemma, don't throw your markers on the floor. The way the physics of this is that in any planer, you've got a roller and a cutter head. There. And then there's a table. And when your stock comes in, no. When your stock comes in and hits this roller, on a lot of benchtop planers, what happens is the whole headstock moves up. When there's pressure under this roller, the head cocks like this. So as a result, when this first edge moves forward and gets under the cutter head, it overcuts until the material gets under the outfeed roller. Then this evens out again. Then it cuts fine. And then just the opposite happens. When the material is no longer under the infeed roller, the whole head goes this way and it overcuts and then it exits. So if you're feeding scrap that precedes and follows your real material, your target wood, the goal with that is that you're lengthening the runway here and you're preventing the headstock from being able to cock back and forth while your target material is under it. So I don't understand how if you're doing scrap, that could be an issue. The other thing to always check is if you've got extension tables on your planer. A lot of times those extension tables fold and there'll be some kind of an alignment that you can do to make sure these are perfectly aligned, meaning it's flat from the infeed side of this side all the way to the outfeed side of that side, including the extension tables. If that's not flat, I could see where even with the scrap board, then you could be cocking your material by virtue of the tables not being flat. So that could be what's messing you up. So my advice, make sure you're using the headstock lock if you have one. Make sure the headstock lock is working. And what that does is it prevents the head from being able to do this. So you should be able to unplug the planer, unlock the headstock, put a little up pressure just with your hands on the rollers and see if it moves a little, which it probably will, and then lock the headstock and see if you can eliminate that movement. So that'll tell you if the headstock lock is working. And then if you do have in-feed and out-feed extension tables, make sure those are dead, absolutely dead flat all the way across. I have a very raspy voice today, so I'm trying to wash that down. Linda and Bob say, I'm trying to round over a small table edge. I'm using a small handheld router and round over a bit. How do you start? I start but 1 or 2 inches in. I start 1 or 2 inches in, and then I not know how to go back and finish the pieces where I started. I would be going the wrong way with the router. Okay, this is a good question. Let me get some stuff, because this router work is very critical. And I'm going to come by you. We've got a video that's called, I think it's just called Handheld Router Techniques, and all of this kind of stuff is covered in there. And if you have any lack of comfort level with handheld routers, it'd be a very, very good one to watch. Here's the way you work the outside of a piece. So one, where we start, always start on end grain, because when we go this way, we might get a little bit of chipping right there. And if we do, the next cut's going to clean that off. When I turn the router on, I'm going to make sure the bit is not touching the material. It's a little bit off. I'll turn the router on and then move in and engage the router bit. Now, what they're describing is the way I'm going to do this, which is it's nearly impossible to start right on that corner. So I'm going to start in just a little bit, and the little bit is really critical. I don't want to start here. I want to start just inside the corner, and then I'm going to back cut just a little bit. What we want to do with this is go around the board counterclockwise to work against the rotation of the cutter. So what's going to happen when I have to back up just a little to finish that corner, that's climb cutting. And that's the reason I don't want to be way in here to start, is I don't want to climb cut 3 inches. I want to climb cut a 1/2 inch. So I can see in the router base right here. I'm going to look in there to get a feel for where I am. Turn the router on. Engage. Back cut a little. Move forward. Come around the corner. Engage. Back cut a little. Finish. Now this gets, it just kind of puts me in an awkward body position over here. So instead of reaching, it's easier if I just turn this around. Same deal. Engage, back cut, come across. Now let me see if I manage to get this shot. I will be very impressed with myself. Try to give you an angle here where you can see what I'm actually seeing. That'll be pretty close. All right, so I'm gonna come in, back cut to the corner, move. Try to keep my hand out of the way for you. Engage, back cut. So the router bit is contacting about there, and I'm only climb cutting that tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. Isn't it impressive? I love that little Milwaukee cordless router. And the fact that it's got that break on it is part of what, it's one of my favorite features. Let's see if I got that camera right. Yeah, not bad. So if you're familiar with computers, you've probably heard about these. These are wireless routers. See what I did there? Hashtag dad jokes. All righty. Mike says, watching your videos, when making jigs, you typically use glue and staples for fastening? Question mark. Could a brad nailer be used in place of a staple gun, or are staples essential to hold pieces in place while glue dries? I own a brad nailer, but not a staple gun. So wondering if I should add a staple gun to my Amazon wish list. Well, of course, camera's crooked again. Of course you should add a staple gun because, you know, tools. But like you, I had a brad nailer for a really long time before I added a staple gun. The deal with staples versus brads is it's like whiteboard day. Because the staples have a crown, when you use a staple, especially in thinner madman material, like 1/4-inch plywood or something, a brad has a good chance, the head is so tiny on a brad, it has a good chance of just blowing through and not giving you a lot of bite in the material. So often, probably on a lot of jigs, I'm fastening 1/4-inch masonite, 1/4-inch plywood to something else. So I am pretty consciously choosing a staple gun for that instead of a brad nailer because of that propensity for the brad head to go through. Not imperative to have a stapler, but I would say over time, yes, put one on your wish list and add one to the shop, because there are applications like that where it's just better. If I'm building, like if I'm shipping something out of here and it's going in a crate that I built, a lot of my crates are 1/2-inch plywood, 1/2-inch OSB, and that's where 1.25-inch staples, that's how I build those crates. So another spot, I recognize that's a little niche-y because I end up shipping projects or tools, but it's another good spot to have a stapler. Steve says, I'm building a mid-century style nightstand out of white oak. Plan to use mitered corners for the cabinet. What would you recommend using to reinforce the joint? So if you want it to be blind, if you don't want to see the reinforcement, then biscuits, dominoes, any kind of a loose tenon like that inside the miter, you could spline them without then, that would be harder to do. You'd probably have to build like a table saw jig or something, but you could get a spline in there. But I think the easiest, like a biscuit joiner would be the easiest path to success. So one of the things, we're just about halfway through, couple things to talk about. One is, if you missed the live stream from this morning, it was a pretty cool one. I cut aluminum on the table saw. I cut 1/4-inch thick aluminum plate. So kind of a weird process. It requires a special blade, some other things on the table saw. So we always archive the live stuff. So if you missed the live, you can always go back and watch it. So that's pretty fun. As always, thanks to Tight Bond, where are they? There, for sponsoring this live stream so that it makes it free for you. And then also one of the things we've done with a bunch of our content is hubbed it together, if that's a verb, so that a bunch of stuff relating to getting started in woodworking is all in one spot. So toward the bottom of the page where you're watching, there's a banner that says get started in woodworking, and there's a spot there you can click. And there's information there, even if you've been woodworking for a while. There's great information there about buying wood, storage in your shop, work triangles in your shop, a lot of information you're going to be able to take advantage of. Jim says, George, from this morning when I asked about metal touching the blade before it stops, on page 56 of the SawStop manual states safety system will remain in bypass mode until the blade comes to a complete stop. Yep, I think that's what we talked about, and that's my default is always read the owner's manual. So thank you for doing that and straightening that out. And Lavere says, "Good evening from Barbados." I think that might be our first Barbados watcher. And he also asks, "Would you recommend the Famo wood filler?" I've never used it, so I don't know. I have no familiarity with it. David says, when using a router on hardwood, what should the depth per pass, what should the depth be per pass so the wood doesn't burn? Yes, there are about 200 variables with this. You need to first make sure your bit is sharp. You need to make sure the bit is clean. Depth of cut per pass is going to depend on the profile. A real simple profile like a 1/4 inch round over, you're not removing much stock no matter what. So you can take a little bit more off per pass. Something like a big aggressive OG or a Cove, the volume of material removing is way more significant. So your passes have to be much lighter. So trial and error is going to tell you some of this. And what I always do is, no matter what, I'm going to do multiple passes with the slightest percentage pass being the last one. I'm saving the smallest percentage of removal for the very last pass. So maybe it's 30%, 30%, 20%, 10%, 10% or something. I'm not doing the math right there, but I'm trying to get it to where only 10 or 15% of my stock removal is being done on that very last pass in order to optimize the surface, make sure I don't get ripples that a router bit can leave behind, and make sure I don't get burns. But then, there's hardwood and there's hardwood. Hard maple is a whole different thing to work with than walnut. So I can't give you a number, but you got to experiment with it and then leave a really light pass for the last cut so that you have room in the profile for a cleanup pass. Joe says, I'm currently building your table saw cabinet, going well so far. My question is for French cleats. Is there a particular size they should be when creating a French cleat wall? I've only done a tiny bit of French cleat stuff. I know other people have done a boatload, other people who do what I do, videos, have done a boatload of French cleat stuff. So it's worth Googling and seeing what other people have done. When I did it, the cleats were 2 inches from the square edge to the long point of the 45-degree cut. And I think I kind of randomly landed on that. You want to have, once you've taken away the miter, you want to have enough meat left on the bottom of that cleat that you can fasten it to the wall or the thing you're going to hang on the wall. And 2 inches felt like it worked well, but it'd be worth poking around with other creators, other makers, and see what they say too. Barry says, I will soon build a set of 9-panel glass bifold cabinet doors. Wow, very cool. 9-panel glass bifold cabinet doors. The opening is 57 high, 37 wide, so the doors will be slightly less than half the full width of the opening. seeking advice on how to mount the hinges, guides, track, and stationary posts to minimize the gap at the top and the bottom of the doors. This is another yes. Bifold, so I'm assuming then that means if you've got a 57-inch opening, you're going to have 4 doors that are each like 14¼ inches wide. I have not ever used this hardware. I've never made a set of doors like that, so I don't know. It's always worth mocking stuff up. So frequently when I'm using hardware for the first time, the first doors I install will be made from 3/4 inch plywood, not 9-light cabinet doors. And yes, you're doing everything like twice, maybe it's not quite twice because you're not making all the true divided light doors, but it lets you experiment with sizes with inexpensive material before you work with the real stuff. So I can't speak directly to this because I've never done it, but I can speak to when hardware is new to me, when techniques are new to me. It's just like practicing a technique before you use it on a project. I would mock it up with fake doors first and see what you have to do to those to get the look that you're trying to get. It'll be worth the time investment to get that figured out. David says, what's the basic procedure for planing multiple different size thickness boards to a final set point? Let's say, for example, to 1 inch exactly for all boards. So if I'm reading this right, you're starting with a pile of material. Some is 2 inch, some is 1 3/4, some is 1 1/2, some is 1 1/4, but you want every stick to end up at 1. So I always just start with the thickest piece, and then I've got all the other parts nearby. So I start with the 2-inch piece, plain, 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 and then as material comes off, I'm starting to compare it to the 1 3/4 piece. And when the top of the 2 is even with the top of the 1 3/4, then I start sending the 2-inch piece, what used to be the 2-inch piece, and the 1 3/4 piece together. Now you're going to remove material from both of those. Then eventually you're going to take those 2 boards and compare them in thickness to the 1 1/2 piece. And when they're even across the top, then you're going to send all 3 until you get to the 1 1/4. Then you're going to send all 4 and take them down to 1. So you just have to carefully monitor your parts as you go, so you don't suddenly stuff a really fat piece in after you've already lowered the planer head a bunch. But that's a relatively easy way to make that work. Norman says, I have some ash boards that I milled over 30 years ago. It's been air drying ever since. What can I make from it since it's only air dried? Anything you want. So remember that today we make a big deal out of kiln dried wood and access to man-made materials, and it's great that we have that. But people made really beautiful furniture 150, 200 years ago when they were not kiln drying wood. It's not that long ago that every stick of wood was air dried. You just have to allow for that when you build. So part of the difference is that, as a rule, air dried wood will seasonally expand and contract a lot more than kiln dried wood. That's fine as long as we know it's going to do that. So you can build cabinets, tables, chairs, whatever you want to make, just making sure that you keep in mind that little bit of additional seasonal expansion and contraction. One of the things that's cool about air dried stuff, if you have any interest in bending wood, air dried material bends more readily than kiln dried material. So this would be a great opportunity. Make an ash toboggan and bend that front around the way toboggans are made. Ash should be a great material for that. The air dried stuff, still got to steam it and that. But the air dried stuff would bend more readily than kiln dried, so that would be fun. So yeah, don't be afraid of making whatever you want to make. Just keep in mind that your expansion and contraction will be greater than it would if it was kiln dried. Any advice on fixing miter cuts that are coming apart? I forgot to put thin layers of glue before clamping them together. Well, are they glued? I don't know what you mean by I forgot to do thin layers of glue before clamping them. So if they're, like if what you mean is you didn't put enough glue on and the joints are falling apart, then I don't know what to do except to completely take them apart and re-glue them, which would probably also involve scraping any glue residue off so that doesn't interfere with the joint. Sorry. So you'd have to clean up the joint and then put everything back together. Robert says hello from a fellow Wisconsinite. Hello, Robert. Do we got enough snow for you? And I shouldn't, a friend of mine lives in Milwaukee and they have like no snow on the ground. So I'm in kind of the lower end of the upper third of the state of Wisconsin. And in the yard, like, so not where I have blown snow, but just where there is snow, it's probably up, almost up to my knee. Not quite, but we have a lot of snow on the ground right now. All right, so Barry has another question on the doors. I will be using white oak to make those 9-panel glass cabinet doors. Right now the wood is in raw condition, stored in my garage. How should I cut and plane it so it doesn't distort in final size and shape? Should I make 3 layered laminate pieces to work with or just use solid? I mean, if they're going to end up being whatever, 3/4 or 1 inch thick doors, I wouldn't be afraid of working with solid wood, one solid piece, not making a lamination. But typical sequence of events, joint one face flat, then plane to thickness, get them in your shop so they have a chance to acclimate to the shop before you start working with them, well in advance of working with the project. So just same stuff you would normally do with solid wood in order to prevent it from distorting. Assuming it's been dried correctly, then it should be fine. Tom says, where might I go to learn how to turn a streamlined pen? So pen turning is a crazy cool thing. It's a great way to get kids in woodworking because it's a very benign turning project and they end up with a pen. A lot of stores, a lot of retail stores like the Woodcraft stores and Rockler stores offer pen turning classes. So I would, if you've got a Rockler or a Woodcraft in your area, look to see what their class offerings are. And then you could also see if there's a turning club, check Google for wood turning clubs in your areas and see if they've got any hands-on events that you can go to. That would give you a few options. John asks, is there going to be another Meet the Makers this summer? Tentatively, yes. So I'm picking the date. I like it to be close to the 21st of June. And I think this summer, the 21st is a Wednesday. So it's either going to be the Saturday before or the Saturday after. But it went well again this summer. If you didn't see this, if you didn't see information about this, I've done 2 events here at my shop called Meet the Makers. It's a big open house. And makers from the area, including Matt Cremona, Paul Mayer, Donovan Cummings, I'm going to miss a bunch of people, Emily Chen, a bunch of makers come. Some are here just to kind of meet and greet, and then others are here demonstrating. So I ran a sawmill, Donovan was running a CNC, Emily was doing finishing techniques. There's a friend of mine, Casey Grau, was doing leather work. So there are lots of little demos going all day. It's a very cool thing. So you can watch for that, and I'm sure I'll talk about it when it's going to happen. But yeah, anyway, John, the most likely, yes. Larry says, when a glue up goes wrong, when gluing feet on a chest and a gap occurs, will filling the gap with glue be strong? So no, because typical yellow glues are not gap filling. And the number I was given was yellow glues will fill gaps up to like 2 or 3 thousandths of an inch. That's about a piece of paper. 1/16 of an inch gap is 30 thousandths of an inch. So if you want to reinforce that, then that's an epoxy job. You want to put epoxy into that gap. Joel says, is there a mechanism for contacting or emailing to submit concerns or questions that don't seem appropriate for this venue? So, well, any question you have, you can put here. And then this came up, I think, Max, did we talk about, I think you and I talked about this last time, that there is a customer service email, right, that you can put in the comments, Max. And you can always email woodworking questions to customer service, and then myself and Paul get those emails and then answer them. So those trickle in from either comments on videos or from people just contacting customer service. So I think, yeah, so even at, I'm answering questions on WWGOA.com, where many of you are watching this live. And then when I scroll to the bottom of the page, it says customer service. Under that heading, it says contact us. So if you go there, there's going to be an email for customer service. Then you can just email your question in and go from there. Richard says, I've heard that walnut is not food safe, but I've seen a number of plans using walnut. Is a finish covering the walnut, such as the linseed oil, shellac, and mineral spirits, so that's that mix I often use, enough to make the food walnut safe, or make the walnut food safe, or is it truly not an issue when in contact with food? So I think there's a little, like, you want to be careful. Like I wouldn't make a coffee cup out of walnut. But if you make a cutting board and material is in short contact with any wood, and then it's removed and the wood has been sealed, I think we've all ended up in a spot where you're going to be okay. You know, that don't mix walnut shavings with your oatmeal, because that would taste really bad and it would be bad for you. Don't use walnut shavings as animal bedding, ever. I mean, I'm not joking about that. That's for real. But if you put it in a cutting board or something and you seal it up, then you should be okay. YouTube question. Local wood something store sells steamed and unsteamed walnut. Unsteamed is half the cost of steamed. What is the difference? So typically in woods like cherry and walnut, one of the things you run into is that the heartwood is the beautiful cherry color or the beautiful walnut color. Sapwood, the sapwood in cherry is almost white. It's kind of ivory colored. And in walnut, it's really yellow. So what steaming can do is unify the color so that you don't have to worry about sapwood. For me, I like the sapwood, and my feeling is, and my woodworking includes knots and other stuff, like it's part of the tree. So it's part of the walnut, it's part of the cherry. So as a rule, I just go ahead and include that in my projects, and I like how it looks. If you don't, then a way to get around that is to buy steam material. So in the cost evaluation, what one would be looking at is, let's say I'm doing custom work for a customer and they want it in walnut or cherry, and they're saying absolutely no sapwood. I know that if I get an order in here of walnut or cherry boards, some amount of sapwood is going to be in there. So as I'm working around that, as I'm cutting out waste, as I'm cutting out sapwood, part of the board footage I bought is sapwood that's going in a junk pile. I'm also spending a bunch of my time eliminating that sapwood from the project. So the reason I know all this is that many, 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 many years ago, 1994-ish, I was a production manager of a shop where we built all the Banana Republic stores in the country, and they were completely cherry inside. Every fixture, the paneling, everything was cherry. So at that time, we looked at steamed cherry just for this reason, that so that we wouldn't have to eliminate sapwood. We would know that just literally any board you took off a pile was going to be good to go, uniform in color. Carrie says, hello from Appleton. I'm building out my shop now and want to include the table saw and router table into one large bench. Do you see any issues doing that? No. So it's not uncommon that, like, on the right side of a table saw, that is the router table. The reason I don't do that here, I love the space saving concept, but I don't do that here is because of classes, and frequently in a class environment, somebody's using the table saw and somebody else has to be able to use the router table concurrently. But schematically, for woodworking, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Question from YouTube. I'm having an issue with a segmented piece of white ash in Padauk. Padauk keeps bleeding into the ash. I've tried compressed air, vacuuming, denatured alcohol. Any recommendations? Thanks. Yeah, we either this question previously or another one exactly like it came up before, and Paul, who answers questions with me, and I talked about this a lot, and neither of us have great solutions for this. So what, Padauk is a very pretty wood, and because it's kind of an orangish color, and because of that color contrast, it's commonly used against lighter colored woods. Maple would be another great example. And what can happen is that you put these parts together, you have this beautiful light and dark contrast, and then when you put finish on, the orange from the Padauk tends to bleed into the lighter colored wood. So one thing you could experiment with are different finishes. So I've seen this happen when I've put lacquer on stuff like this, and it's not a huge surprise because the solvent for lacquer is lacquer thinner, which is a really, really strong solvent. I wonder, I don't know this, I wonder if you did a base coat of shellac. The solvent for that is denatured alcohol, nowhere near as strong a solvent as lacquer thinner. If you did a base coat of shellac, could you seal everything up, not get the bleed, and then top coat with whatever you want? Could you do linseed oil first? Solvent for that is mineral spirits, and maybe not get the bleed. And the answer to all of this is I don't know. It's you'd have to glue a bunch of parts together, experiment with different finishes, and see what does and doesn't cause this. Or it's quite possible there's somebody in the woodworking world who knows way more about this than I do. Sorry, and could answer the question and could give you more of a rifle shot to the answer. But I've seen it happen, and I don't have a great solution for it. Question from the YouTube. I was given a lot of 1x2s that are twisted and bows. How do I get them straight? Well, you can't straighten twisted or bowed wood. At that point, it has assumed its new shape and you have what you have. So the way you get it straight is you joint it until you've produced a flat face. Then you plane the other face until it's parallel to the first face. So in other words, you're machining it to make it straight. You can't like, whatever, put it in a press or get it wet or put cinder blocks on it, or if you, any of that you try to do, when you take the weight off, it's just gonna spring back to where it is now. So the way that one works with cupped or twisted material is you machine the cup or the twist out. And then back to the question about sending stuff in. Max has put the contact information for customer service in the comments here. So you can, like I said, you can always send an email through them, and eventually Paul and I will see it. Leonard says, a while back, I sent some info regarding safety and handling denatured alcohol. I haven't heard anything back, whether you received it or not. This is an important safety issue. I have no idea what that's about. Thomas says, I put a project aside for a while. The Padauk started browning. Will good sanding get the original color back somewhat? Yeah, so a downside to cool woods like Padauk and Purple Heart is that they darken over time. So if you just like, if you didn't have finish on it, if it wasn't sealed, it probably started to darken. Sanding should bring the orange back. And then with some woods, it's exposure to air, it's oxidation that causes it to darken. With some woods, it's UV that causes it to lose its color. So box elder is another great example of this. One of the redeeming values of box elder are these amazing pink stripes it can have, but over time they fade. I don't know in that particular case, is it UV or is it oxidation? With Padauk, I think it's exposure to air. So I think if you sand it and then you finish it, you're gonna have and maintain that color, but that would merit a little bit more research. In other words, do you also need specifically a UV resistant finish? If it's UV that makes the color change happen, then a UV resistant finish so that you're blocking the UV from the Padauk is gonna help that. So that would take a little bit more research. Does Tight Bond 2 for dark wood have better gap filling capability than yellow glue? Nope, they're all about the same. So they're all of the, I'll plunk them all into the same family. I think they're all aliphatic resins is what they really are. So yellow glue, Tight Bond 2, or Tight Bond Original, Tight Bond 2, Tight Bond 3, very minimal gap filling capabilities. So it's not something, you don't want to rely on any conventional wood glue for gap filling. Question from YouTube. I've run into trouble with Padauk, finished with tung oil or walnut oil. A white film appears on the surface over time. If you encounter this, is pure oil not recommended for Padauk? No, I have never seen that. And I've turned some Padauk, and then the finish on that would be my typical like shellac-based top coat, and I've never had that. So I don't know what, that's an interesting reaction. What is, yeah, I don't know what would be, what the chemistry would be for tung oil or walnut oil to create a white film. I don't know, filament 11. Yeah, I don't know what would be making that happen. I have not seen that. All right, we are just about out of tiempo here. So again, a couple things. One, if you missed the live stream from this morning, cutting aluminum, crazy cool, very fun. And again, all of our live streams are always archived. So you can always go back and watch the one I did with Jimmy DeResta, the one I did with Alicia Albertson, or whatever live streams you want to watch, including cutting aluminum from this morning. Then we have put together a lot of woodworking information into one hub where you can find it. and that's called Getting Started in Woodworking. If you've been woodworking for a while, don't be deceived by that title. There's a lot of great stuff there about understanding material better, wood, solid wood and man-made materials, shop storage, work triangles, lots of stuff that has to do with your shop. So there's a link right on the page here that you can click on. That'll take you there. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that look for the great videos that Alicia Albertson and Jimmy DiResta did when they were here. Those are starting to be edited and come out on the site. And they bring a lot of their own personalities to the videos and a lot of their own knowledge, a lot of topics that they covered that I'm not able to cover because I don't know anything about. So it's very, very cool. I'm very happy to see that stuff kicking out. All right. And Max put a link for the cutting aluminum in the comments here. So that'll take you straight to it. All right. Jim says, would you recommend investing in compression router bits for cleaner routing? So this is, we can talk about upcut and downcut spiral router bits. And I've got a bunch of CNCs in the shop because I do CNC classes here. And I own many, many, many router bits. 98% of them are upcut router bits and 2% are downcut. So with the downcut bit, as it spins, the spiral is kind of like backwards. So obviously it's still cutting, but the spiral is such that it's pushing the fibers down into the wood instead of lifting them out. The downside of that is it doesn't excavate the cut as well. It doesn't bring the dust out as well. But the good news is on a fragile surface, because we're cutting down into it instead of lifting it, you're going to get less chipping. So the reason I have such a small percentage of downcut bits is because I use them so infrequently. It's very rare for me to run into a scenario where I feel like I need to use a downcut bit. So, you know, if you're up against something like curly maple, crotch, ash, I don't know, something that's super, super, super fragile, then that might be a scenario where you need a downcut bit. But I find very, very few instances where I have to use them. So 5 bells. Thanks so much for watching. A month from now, that'll be February, we're going to do this again. If I know weather in Wisconsin, it'll probably be 20 below that day, because usually in February we get about 2 weeks where it is 15 to 20 below temperature, not wind chill, every day for about 2 weeks. So we have that to look forward to. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching, and I will see you the next time we do this.